All right, thanks for coming over with us here to clickondetroit.com as we continue this morning's roundtable discussion here on Flashpoint with Stephen Henderson from the Detroit Free Press, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell from the Detroit News, Ingrid Jacques, and from the Detroit Regional Chamber, Sandy Barua. Sandy, what are we learning now as we look at all of this grouped together about emergency management?
Well, I think one of the things that we're learning is that the state, over 2 governors, both Democratic and Republican governors, that were at least, if not anxious, but willing certainly to engage in emergency management. I don't think we're going to see emergency management for a while now, because now the state is on the hook for things that happened in Flint because there was an emergency manager there. They're on the hook for a lot of DPS debt because there was emergency management for such a long time in DPS. And the people locally can say, well, it's the state's problem. And in DPS, the state is actually legally on the hook for that. Yeah. So I think you're going to see the state be much more reticent to engage in emergency management going forward.
I mean, they should be. I mean, actually, we have been saying to the governor since he was elected at the Free Press that emergency management is a tool, but it's got to be put in the context of a much wider policy about urban areas, about investment, about the reinvestment in urban areas after such a long period of
but 2 quick points. I mean, emergency management worked really well in the city of Detroit, right?
It did, with a lot of help.
With a lot of help. It also worked well in Flint. I think one of the things that we forget is that, Flint was on its way back. Flint's downtown, a lot of investment there, the Mott Foundation, private sector investment. They've repurposed a lot of GM facilities, doing very well. And then, boom, the minute they get out of emergency management, this lead thing hits. But again, the decision...
now that makes it sound like it happened independent of emergency management. It happened in emergency management.
It happened in emergency management, but I mean... listen, what happened in Flint is tragic, but let's not overlook the fact that the decision to move the water supply from DPS to another source was first driven by City Council, the mayor at the time. The population wanted it. The emergency manager at the time approved the decision. The state approved the decision. But it's not like the state said, you will do this, right? This was a locally driven decision.
I think we don't know the facts, and I think we've got to right now worry about the people in the city of Flint. Here's the reality. 40% of the people of Flint live at a poverty line, $25,000 or less. The average water bill was $140 a month. And by the way, they're still being told to pay for this leaded water.
To bill these people for water they can't drink
of their income. This is a crisis, and we don't know what happened. Let's let other people get the facts, and let's take care of them.
No, in terms of who to point the finger at, and I hate that term, in terms of who dropped the ball, and I agree with you. You said
government failed.
Government failed at every level. At every level, government failed.
But again, emergency management is a tool to be able to help you restructure debt and free up more cash to be able to pay for services. That's a really important tool for the state to have, but it's a limited tool.
Right.
It doesn't deal with, think of the population loss in Flint over the last 2 decades. Think of the valuation in property losses over the last 2 decades. Think of the loss in revenue sharing and other helps from the state. You can balance the books under the current conditions, but until you attack those current conditions to try to build the city back up with population, with taxes, it's going to be really hard for any of these places to manage.
And this is going to be even worse now, because now think about what's happened to real estate values.
Absolutely.
Who's going to want to go
and
there?
The truth is, this governor has no agenda for that. Every time I ask him about it, what he says is, well, if the legislature wants to come up with something, I would do it. But he has not put anything on paper about what to do in the long term.
Speaking of the governor, one thing I wanted to make sure we got to was, how did you feel like he did in his State of the State address? I heard from an awful lot of people who were very unhappy with him, but I thought then maybe there wasn't anything he could say, because he apologized, he took responsibility, and said he's going to fix it.
He said he's sorry, I'll fix it. I don't really know what else he could have said at this point. Along those lines, I had a very interesting conversation with him on Thursday. I got a column about it today.
Right.
And he was the most unguarded I've ever seen him. This situation has clearly rattled him, very much so. And I think it surprised him.
In the address, that was as emotional as many of us have seen him.
He was with me as well. And I think his heart really goes out to the people of Flint. And the uproar statewide and nationally is justified in a sense, but the attacks on him personally, I think, those are going to stay with him for a while.
Devin, let me just say, I think the speech was almost unprecedented in terms of an elected official taking so much responsibility in this day and age. In the age of Donald Trump, you don't see that. The second thing I would say is that the one criticism that I think you can make about the governor is that he is very data-driven. He's a data-driven guy, and clearly, as the emails show, he was asking for data. He was asking for data from the Department of Environmental Quality. That person who leads that agency is now gone. The regional director of the EPA is now gone. I mean, clearly, the people who are supposed to provide him and others data.
He was angry about that, that the information he continued to get. He kept asking questions, and they
clear,
gave him wrong information.
And as every chief executive officer's worst nightmare is that the people that work with and around him or her fail them.
Congresswoman, you get the last word on Governor Snyder.
Look, I'm not going to take cheap political shots because I don't think that's what, right now we got to all pull together. And I know that the delegation, and it wants to work together in a bipartisan manner. Fred Upton pulled the EPA in this week, is going to hold them accountable. We need to at the state. Let's work together to, one, make sure the people of Flint are safe, they have everything they need, and get them information. Is it safe to bathe or not bathe in that water? No one can even answer that question for me yet. Two, what's it going to take to fix it long term? And fixing it long term is not only fixing the infrastructure there, but how do we give the city a future? And then three, let's get the facts and make sure it never happens again in an American city in this country.
We'll leave it there. Thank you all very much for being here, and thank you for making the trip with us over here to clickondetroit.com as well. We'll see you next week for Flashpoint. That was great. In fact, I'll suggest to